Coming up next, one of the greatest singer-songwriters of the 80s and beyond tells the story of his very first band going into his second band. His first band, they were underground heroes. They would later conquer the mainstream, do that more in his second band, but had some of the best songs of the decade in these two bands, including their 1980 single that became the biggest selling in Australian history, even though my legendary guest today thought the chorus was corny, and he was actually planning to replace it, but he ran out of time. Then there was another single that became one of the first videos played on MTV, where one of his bandmates did the Moonwalk years before Michael Jackson did. Then there's a song that he wrote for a fan because they traveled all across the world to meet him. It's an entertaining interview with one of the finest songwriters ever, coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you ever owned a members-only jacket back in the day, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now. Click the bell so you never miss an episode. And make sure to check out ProfessorOfRock.com. We've got some live streams coming up there. So it's time for another edition of our show, one of my favorites we do on here, Revelations, where featured artists tell rare stories about their greatest songs and their greatest albums. Insight you will not find anywhere else. And you're going to love this one. It's another one of our most requested songs from you, the viewers. I've actually got Neil Finn, the singer and writer behind Crowded House. But today, in addition to covering Crowded House, we get the story behind several of his biggest songs with his first band, Split Enz, which was really his brother Tim's band that he started way back in 1972 with Phil Judd, and they were more of a progressive art rock band. But then when Judd left, little brother Neil Finn came in and the band started moving into a more new wave style. That's a whole lot. Neil's song, I Got You, that became the band's biggest hit, and the catchy opening guitar riff would later be ripped off by a famous rapper for his biggest hit. Let's see if you can figure it out. Neil thought the verses were good on this song, but he wanted to replace the chorus. He thought it was a little corny, but he ran out of time. But in the end, the song became the biggest selling song in Australian history. We're also going to take a look at the classic song One Step Ahead, in which Neil's bandmate beat Michael Jackson to the punch on doing the Moonwalk. It was one of the first videos played on MTV. You're going to love this story. One step ahead of you. And then Neil tells us about forming Crowded House and the fan who traveled all around the world to meet him and how it turned into one of the band's best songs. Here's the interview. Well, I want to ask you about I Got You, because #1 in Australia and you know, and New Zealand and, you know, UK when your big hits there. Look at you. You're a pageant. 11th best New Zealand song of all time.
Sounds like a Flight of the Conchords episode, isn't it?
Yeah.
11th
but the
best.
beginning guitar riff, you know, that was always resonated so much when I first heard that. And then years later, I would hear another #1 song that kind of borrowed that a little bit. Eminem, Lose Yourself. It really kind of takes that same progression. The
I'll have to listen to that now.
Dun, dun, dun.
Look.
That semitone shift thing, actually, and I'm not saying it's because of I Got You, but it's a very effective device, and Dre uses that a little bit too. On sort of his, it's got a slightly dark, threatening thing at the same time as, in our case, was very poppy as well. But
it does. Yeah. What I loved about the song is it was kind of a little dark, but then you get into the chorus and it's got that, you know, just toe tapping, just great melody. Let me ask you about writing it. You know, the story behind that. Where did it come from?
We were in Sydney between records, and the band had just come through a period of really it had been quite difficult for us, but we just emerged. My brother Tim wrote a song called I See Red. that became quite a big hit in Australia, and we started to be able to play gigs and earn some money for the first time in the band's career.
Yeah.
And we were able to move into a place in Rose Bay in Sydney, and we had a period where Tim was in his room and I was in my room. We were writing songs and we were kind of giving each other titles. And I don't know whether I Got You was particularly Tim's title, but it was in that period, and it was a very fertile period. Most of the songs from True Colours were written in that place and in that period. And we had David Tickle, who was our producer at the time, just finished working with Mike Chapman. He'd done the Blondie record and the Knack, that just come off the back of a lot of really fine pop record making. And he had methodology, which we'd never encountered before. And he sat in there with our drummer, Malcolm, and made him play the same bass drum pattern from beginning to the end of the song. He wouldn't let him step off it. It was just it was a Chapman-esque technique. So everything about that record and that song popped its head up at rehearsal, and I always thought the chorus was, I thought the verse is cool, but I'm going to have to get a chorus, improve the chorus. It's do something like that, but that's probably too corny, that chorus. But of course, that probably is because it was really hooky, and I was just a little resistant, We were a bit, at the time, you want to feel like you're not occupying any generic space or hooky, like pop.
Yeah.
Cliche. So,
right.
But yeah, as soon as we started playing it at rehearsal, David Tickle just sort of looked up and went, "Wow, that's a hit," and he was right.
You were writing it. Did you have that first part? Is that how it kind of started, or did you just have pieces of it?
I know I had the whole thing, but as I said, I thought the chorus needed to be improved or needed to find a new chorus for it. So I probably had a few lines to write. It's very traditional for me to have like a verse and a half I get at the time, and then the other half of verses takes me about 3 months to write. It was like that for that one, I think.
Well, and this is at the time of, videos and, the music video that was really, interesting with the frame, the guys singing in the frame in the background. And all
and some massive overacting from me.
We had a lot of different covers of it too, great covers of Vitamin C.
Look at you.
And the Connells. But Pearl Jam, they're performing it live, and
they do a good cover of it, and which we've done with them on a couple of occasions. But I really love the fact that they dispensed with a couple of the chords. They just kind of took the chorus and made it a 3-chord chorus.
And also, I remember seeing a cover of Semisonic did it. They were a band that had a couple of hits.
That was Dan Wilson. Yeah, in fact, I sang it with them one night on stage in Auckland, yeah.
Do you remember the first time that you heard that on the radio? Where you were and kind of...
I do remember that because I had the experience of hearing something on the radio and immediately realizing that it was going to do really well because it just bounced out of the radio. And not everything that you do, in fact, sometimes it's the opposite. You really work hard on a song and the first time you hear it on the radio, you go, it's not even as loud as the song that came before it. But in that case, I was at my wife's father's house in Auckland. I remember the moment, yeah. And it just sounded really great to me. So I thought, that's going to travel, that one.
Well, what I love about that album too is one of Tim's best songs, I Hope I Never.
I hope I never have to sign.
Yeah, that's an absolute ripper. Yeah, I've played that a few times recently on piano, and I haven't done it before. It's an impossibly high song to sing.
His vocal on that is...
Yeah, it's crazy.
For years, I thought it was you until I started to really study, liner notes and all that kind of stuff and got it. Because,
I wish it was me.
One step ahead, one of the first videos ever played on MTV.
One step ahead of you.
It was really new in those days. We were one of the first. In fact, I think we were played on the first day. I'm not sure if it was that song.
Yeah, you
They
were one of the
played Split
videos because
Enz,
they only
yeah.
had like 24 videos when they on the first
Yeah.
day. So they played the same ones over and over again.
One step ahead of you. Always.
That was enough for people. Why do they need
Yeah, I know.
70,000 songs on Spotify? We were interested in videos right from way back, even
Oh,
before
yeah,
that.
you guys were always
Noel
recording them.
Crombie was very good at putting together real lean, ideas that could be made. He'd make the sets himself or get his mates in, and so they had a nice homemade aesthetic, but they were also kind of whimsical and theatrical as well.
Know what I'm supposed to do.
So
Yeah.
one step was we did it in the A&M studio lot. With the first time we probably had spent a decent amount of money. Yeah, I was a little bit less overacting, but still, when I look at it,
You
I go,
had some moves.
I had
man.
some moves, and I'm not the
Well,
most elegant dancer.
I'll tell you
has
what,
to be said,
Eddie doing that pantomime illusion thing,
Yeah.
that may or may not have inspired the Moonwalk. I've seen,
Hey,
I've read
why don't we
that.
just say it did?
Yeah.
But it's not nearly as good as the Moonwalk. But yeah, in his
It's
own
cool
Kiwi,
how he's doing it, though.
New
He's
Zealand
like
way.
doing his thing,
Yeah.
but
Stay one step ahead of you.
You don't think anybody's seriously saying that?
yeah, they are. There are
they
people
really?
saying that. He talked about that he had seen it in a movie that they had done back in the 40s. I can't remember what it was called.
If I stop, I could lose my head. So I'm losing you instead.
I wrote that in a motel room in Melbourne. We were trying to follow up True Colours, and it's not easy. You're suddenly really busy, and it's the classic second album thing. And I went and got a little motel room myself in Melbourne and just holed myself up for 3 or 4 days, and that was one that came out. And I've got the recording of it still on a cassette somewhere. I didn't have all the words. Noel Crombie actually helped me out with a couple of the lines in that one. I think he came up with Love is a Race Run by Two. But he had a whole sports theme going. It was actually, for a guy who was freaky, kind of total original, he had quite a weird sort of normal take on that song. But I did borrow that line from him.
Love is a race run by two. Sorry, Mom.
Paul Hester joined as a drummer, and 84, See You Around, kind of the breakup that happened. And you also met Nick Seymour on the tour there, Ends with a Bang tour. And that was the coming together of Crowded House. Tell me kind of about that.
Well, there was, in the sort of the winding down of Split Enz, which, for many reasons, we just entered a difficult phase at that point. My brother went off and made a solo record, which, may have been not enough on its own to mean that the band lost its way, but there was other factors as well. But anyway, it just started to feel kind of difficult, and we were working on new songs, and they weren't really sounding that good. And my brother decided to leave, and I could have kept the name. With everyone in the band thought, well, we should continue on. You can do the songwriting and the singing, and I just couldn't bring myself to be the flag bearer for a band that my brother had started. Whether it had gone well or gone badly, there seemed like a kind of a dangerous scenario for us brothers in either angle. So I thought a new band might be a better, a more energetic sort of way to do it. And, something smaller, and we could form our own band. Paul Hester was the same age as me. We wanted to find our own sound, our own way of doing things. Nick Seymour came along. He's a very extrovert, outgoing, high-energy guy who had a very different approach to bass playing than Nigel. And together, the three of us just seemed to have an immediate chemistry. So we were holed up at Capitol Studios and at Sunset Sound Factory in LA, and we needed a name. So I went to the library, actually just the Hollywood Library one day, and just looked through a few books and found an actual book in the library called Crowded House, and that was the origin of that one. But
It was also that you were in that house too,
yeah,
right?
we were living together in a house, and we had a lot of people staying, visitors from, Australia and New Zealand, and our manager sleeping on the couch. And yeah, it was a really crowded house, and a great place though, great place to be, right above the Magic Castle. We used to throw paper airplanes out the window, and they'd land at the feet of the valet parkers at the Magic Castle, who kind of tolerated it and put them in the bin.
Yeah.
The aim was to make Franklin from our window, which we only, it was just a nice challenge in that. Only did it every now and again. Yeah.
Mean to Me, which really was the first single to come off the record.
Wrote that one in South Yarra, but actually it was one of the few rare occasions where I had the words, at least for the verse, first. So, and it was really also more of a story song. Not that it's still slightly obscure, but it did relate to a girl who had travelled to New Zealand and was determined to meet me.
She came all the way from America. She had
I was doing a tour at the time, and she'd be really devastated if she couldn't say hello, and really, laid it on. So I did make a point of meeting her and I was really sick that night. I had a kind of fever, and so I just said a quick hello and then went back to my room. But I couldn't really sleep, so I went to the lobby and I saw her in the bar with this poet guy who happened to come to our gig that night in New Zealand. He's quite a well-known guy, but he was dancing with her, and it was getting kind of steamy on the dance floor. And
I saw the light in the arms of a poet.
found out later that he had told her that he'd gone to school with me, which was kind of a fabrication. He was trying to woo her, obviously, in a slightly underhand way. So, but it made for a good line in the song.
Absolutely.
And I kind of forgot that it was a real story. But I don't normally write from anecdotal experience, but yeah, that was one.
What do you know? I could not stay.
World Where You Live, another great song, another single that came off of this.
I wrote that in 2 parts. That was, in fact, 3, because the middle eight was written separately. Some of it was written in LA at my manager's house at the time. Well, he was my lawyer at the time, Gary Stamler. And his house, the room I was in was above his kitchen. I used to wake up in the morning to a couple that lived next door being quite noisy about, getting it on. It just occurred to me at the time that you don't know how other people's lives are unfolding, and what kind of physical or mental or cerebral things are happening in their lives. But you hear glimpses and see glimpses of other, and you can only imagine, a
lot of people forget that Crowded House, their classic self-titled debut album, it had Don't Dream It's Over and Something So Strong. It was actually a bit of a flop when it was first released. They really couldn't get anything going in America. The first 3 singles from the album missed the top 40 altogether. They were stiffs, and usually when your first 3 singles flop, you don't get a 4th chance. But the 4th time was definitely the charm, as Don't Dream It's Over became an all-time smash. And it put Crowded House on the map. I mean, for my money, one of the greatest songs of the 80s, and from a person I believe is the most underappreciated songwriter of his generation. I mean, here's a sample of some of his great songs.
You better be home soon. Try whistling this. There is more than one of you, but only are we gonna have some teenage summer.
Truly one of my favorite songwriters ever. Make sure to leave us a comment about Neil Finn, about Crowded House, about Split Enz. What a great band. Let's have a great discussion. What are your memories of these songs? And until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.